Okay, folks, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, thank you so much for joining us on this month's Lunch and Learn. Today, we're going to dive into cider fermentation nutrition. And my name is Sarah Pirtle. I'm the education specialist for the Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute. I look forward to diving into this topic. As a reminder, this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. We will turn the recording off after I present to have time for discussion and questions, so please leave your questions for this time. An overview of what I will talk about today. So first, I will discuss why fermentation nutrition is important and compare the yeast assimilable nitrogen, or YAN, in apple versus grape juice. Then we will discuss organic and inorganic nitrogen sources, followed by common faults that relate to poor nutrition, such as hydrogen sulfide formation and its prevention. Then I will briefly discuss how yeast selection impacts the nutrition significantly. I'll follow that up with tips to improve YAN through foliar and soil nitrogen applications, and how all of this can tie together to improve the quality of your final product. Fermentation nutrition defines product quality. Nutrition is the foundation of every successful fermentation. Just like any living organism, yeast requires a balanced diet to perform efficiently. The primary nutrients that drive fermentation include fermentable sugars, nitrogen sources, essential vitamins and minerals, and survival factors like sterols and unsaturated fatty acids. Together, these components support nutrient health, or yeast health, sorry. When yeast has adequate and varied nutrition, it has the building blocks to create desirable flavors and aromas. On the other hand, nutrient deficiencies can stress yeast, leading to sluggish or stuck fermentations, as well as the formation of off aromas, most notably hydrogen sulfide, which gives that unpleasant rotten egg smell. So, what is yeast assimilable nitrogen? Yeast assimilable nitrogen, or YAN, refers to the total amount of nitrogen that the yeast use during fermentation. It includes three main components: free amino nitrogen, ammonia, and ammonium ions. Together, these represent nitrogen sources that yeast can metabolize to support growth and fermentation activity. YAN is the most important nutrient for yeast health and fermentation, aside from fermentable sugars. It plays a critical role in building proteins, enzymes, and cell structures, and helps yeast to carry out a clean and complete fermentation. When YAN levels are too low, yeast becomes stressed, and that often leads to sluggish or stuck fermentations and the production of those undesirable reductive aromas like H2S. In grape must, YAN can vary widely, but apple juice is typically much lower, and often much lower than 100 milligrams per liter. This means that cider ferments are naturally more prone to nutrient deficiencies and require supplementation. And this also means that cider fermentations must be treated differently than wine fermentations. How does YAN compare in apple juice to grape must? Grapes have 150 to 250 plus milligrams per liter of YAN. Apple juice, on the other hand, contains much less than 100 milligrams per liter. Not only is the quantity of nitrogen different, but the composition is also different. In apples, most of the nitrogen is found in organic form in the form of amino acids. While these are useful nitrogen sources, they don't provide the same balance, and this imbalance can make cider fermentations more prone to nutrient stress. For cider makers, the goal is to raise YAN closer to the levels typically seen in wine fermentation, around 140 milligrams per liter or higher. In fact, depending on the juice's potential alcohol and yeast strain nitrogen demand, aiming for 150 to 200 milligrams per liter can help ensure a strong and clean fermentation. In research conducted in 2016, 120 milligrams per liter was found to be an effective optimum dose for aroma expression. Of course, aroma expression is not the only desired outcome of a successful ferment, but that this does suggest that aiming for lower levels can help promote these. Rarely are there enough nutrients in apple juice for a clean fermentation. Nitrogen concentration is highly cultivar dependent, meaning that different apple varieties contain very different levels of yan. Several studies have highlighted how low these levels can be. For example, research on 13 Virginia apple cultivars found that FAN concentrations ranged from only 18 to 57 milligrams per liter. Similarly, a study from Brazil by Alberti and coworkers in 2011 found that measured an average FAN of about 38.3 milligrams per liter in 51 different apple samples. Most of the total yan comes from free amino nitrogen rather than ammonium. Boudreau and colleagues reported values of 51 milligrams per liter FAN compared to just 9 milligrams per liter ammonium. This imbalance matters because ammonium is a very easily assimilated nitrogen source that helps to maintain healthy metabolism and reduce stress. When both FAN and ammonium are low, yeast are much more likely to struggle during fermentation. 94% of these samples in Boudreau's study had less than 140 milligrams per liter yan, which is the lower end of what's generally considered adequate for complete ferment. Apple juice doesn't provide enough nitrogen, especially in readily available forms, to make yeast demands on its own, which is why nutrient management and supplementation is such a critical part of cider production. When it comes to supplementation, though, the biggest challenge is variability. The yan content of apples can vary in the same orchard in the same year and should be measured, all the time. And it's so important to measure this before you start a ferment, just to know how much supplementation is truly needed. Several factors influence how much nitrogen yeast requires. First is the juice sugar content. Higher sugar means a longer and more demanding fermentation, so yeast will need more nitrogen to stay healthy and active. The condition of the juice also plays a role. If the fruit has been stored for a long time, frozen or concentrated, some nutrients may have been depleted or become less available for the yeast. Native microflora present in the juice will also consume a portion of the available nitrogen before a yeast inoculant gets started, effectively lowering the yan available for fermentation. Dissolved oxygen is another key factor, as oxygen helps yeast to synthesize sterols and fatty acids. So low oxygen levels can increase nitrogen demand. Finally, fermentation, temperature, and orchard management both matter. Warmer fermentations can accelerate yeast metabolism, increasing nitrogen requirements, while fruit from older or poorly maintained trees typically contains less yan. This demonstrates that supplementation is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that you should consider many factors when supplementing. When we talk about nitrogen supplementation, we're looking at inorganic and organic nitrogen. Most commercial yeast nutrients contain a mixture of both. The difference between them lies in how nitrogen is bound and how easily yeast can take it up during fermentation. As mentioned, apples naturally contain most of their nitrogen in organic forms, primarily in amino acids. These are quickly or slowly assimilated and are often linked to the development of more complex aroma profiles. In wine fermentations, this slower uptake can sometimes limit yeast growth. However, in cider, it appears to work efficiently. Boudreau and colleagues found in 2017 that organic nitrogen supplementation performed as well as inorganic sources in cider ferments, with no significant difference in fermentation kinetics. And organic sources also tend to enhance aroma complexity. On the other hand, grapes contain more inorganic nitrogen, especially in the form of ammonium ions, which yeast readily use for rapid growth and fermentation. The most common inorganic supplement in winemaking is diammonium phosphate, or DAP. While DAP is an effective nitrogen booster, it provides only nitrogen and no other micronutrients or vitamins. Over-reliance on inorganic nitrogen can suppress yeast uptake of amino acids, which will lead to simpler aroma profiles. Next, I will discuss the risks of poor fermentation nutrition. Poor fermentation nutrition can lead to stuck or sluggish fermentation. Yeast may not be able to complete the fermentation, leaving residual sugar and lower alcohol than expected. Off-flavor formation is another big one, such as the formation of hydrogen sulfide. Other volatile sulfur compounds can form after this is formed, which are harder to remove. Poor yeast health and stress is another big one. Yeast cells will stop reproducing early, leading to a low biomass. Increased volatile acidity is another risk because stress conditions can increase acetic acid production. Poor fermentation nutrition could also lead to inconsistent product quality and batch-to-batch variability, as well as the loss of desirable aroma compounds. Nitrogen limits restrict ester and higher alcohol synthesis, which will lead to a flat profile. You may think hearing this that hydrogen sulfide formation is directly correlated with the amount of nitrogen that's in apple juice, but that's not the case. It's not always a linear relationship. As mentioned, H2S is one of the most common off aromas in cider, and it's often described as rotten egg smell. Primarily, it's produced when yeast are stressed, usually because of nutrient imbalances. At very low YAN levels, yeast grow slowly and produce small amounts of hydrogen sulfide because they aren't active enough to generate that much. As YAN continues to increase, yeast become more vigorous, but if nitrogen runs out before fermentation is complete, cells will become stressed, which triggers higher H2S production. Other factors need to be considered when considering the production of hydrogen sulfide. Many yeast strains are predisposed to form more H2S under stress, so it's always important to choose a low H2S producing yeast strain for cider ferment. Cooler temperatures will slow the metabolism of yeast down, and other nutrients are needed to help assimilate sulfur properly, which is why you should always choose a balanced yeast nutrient. So, in a cider ferment, what can you do to prevent hydrogen sulfide? Boudreau found that when adding a methionine addition of 5 milligrams per liter for low YAN juice using EC 1118, a common bubbly and wine yeast that's also high alcohol tolerant, up to 18%. They found that this can help prevent the formation of hydrogen sulfide. It's always important to have a fermentation nutrition plan, such as the one outlined by Scott Labs. Understanding your starting YAN and supplementing appropriately can help to prevent hydrogen sulfide formation. Oxygen management also plays a role. Yeast need enough oxygen early in fermentation to help them to synthesize sterols and unsaturated fatty acids. Juice clarification is also very important. Overly turbid juice can increase the risk of H2S formation because yeast become stressed. Temperature also matters. Rosend and colleagues found that cooler fermentations under 18 degrees Celsius produce more H2S than warmer ferments above 30 Celsius, likely due to slower yeast metabolism and longer exposure to the stress conditions. Finally, when adding nutrients, be sure to be careful with them because sometimes the H2S formation can be increased by their overuse. So the amount of nutrients that are needed is tied a lot to the yeast that's selected for the ferment. So when choosing a good yeast for a cider fermentation, it's important to consider, again, the picking one that doesn't produce that much hydrogen sulfide, and also a yeast that produces an aroma profile that's desirable for your finished product. However, if you're planning on finishing your cider sweet, make sure that your yeast is resistant to SO2 because you will need plenty of that to finish sweet, as well as choosing a low temperature resistant yeast. I wanted to take a look at some of the more common yeast strains that are used for cider ferments. So cider yeast strains can vary widely in their malic acid consumption, as well as nutrient needs and alcohol tolerances, and the temperature ranges that they survive and thrive in. So there are these new strains, the sap cider strains, and they're tailored for different outcomes. Some of these are high malic consumers that enhance apple character and produce fruity and floral esters. Some are more aromatic. Some provide some structure and are ideal for lower gravity ciders. But this just kind of demonstrates how supplementation varies depending on what yeast strain you use. So once you select your yeast strain, you should be sure to supplement based on your selected yeast needs. Effective supplementation is about timing it with yeast growth. The goal is to support your yeast at key stages. Begin right after inoculation, giving yeast nitrogen and nutrients to establish growth. A second addition can be made at the end of lag phase when yeast start actively fermenting. And the third stage can occur at 1/3 sugar depletion when yeast population is at its maximum. Be sure to follow a recommended protocol, such as the one from Scott Labs, which recommends 2 to 3 time points of nutrient additions. This will help you to avoid sluggish or stuck ferments. And remember that vitamins and minerals may be the limiting factor for your yeast health, so be sure to use a yeast nutrient that contains those. There have been studies that have been conducted on the impact of timing your organic nitrogen supplementation and how this impacts cider fermentation and aroma. Organic nitrogen plays a key role in cider fermentation because it accelerates the process and creates aroma compounds as well as shortening fermentation time. Amino acids are critical for aroma formation, and their consumption is linked to the production of volatile compounds. The timing, however, is critical. So adding nitrogen before fermentation can influence organic acid composition, while supplementation during the log or growth phase will help to boost total volatile compounds and alcohols. Adding nitrogen in the early stationary phases was found to help to favor the formation of ethyl esters and acids, enhancing fruity aromas. Cider makers can use this information to improve their fermentation performance and help to shape the final flavor and aroma profile. As mentioned, ester production in ciders is influenced by the amino acid content. Higher alcohols are produced from amino acid metabolism and are the precursors for esters, which give cider its fruity and floral aromas. Low YAN can reduce higher alcohol production. Specific amino acids such as aspartate, asparagine, and glutamate have been shown to boost ester formation. For example, Santos and colleagues found that when ciders were supplemented with 120 milligrams per liter nitrogen in the form of 57% glutamate and 43% aspartate, these ferments produced 4 times more esters than a cider that was not supplemented. I'd like to switch gears a bit and talk about things that you can do in your orchard to improve your juice YAN. Foliar applications have been found to improve YAN and also fermentation efficiency. Foliar refers to applying nutrients directly to the leaves of apple trees rather than to the soil. Carl and colleagues sprayed 1% urea spray over 6 weeks, 1 to 5 times pre-harvest, and found that the high treatment, and this was done over 2 years, and they found that the high treatment increased the YAN by 229% 1 year and 408% the second year versus control. 90% of the YAN was found to be in the form of amino acids, especially asparagine. They found that there were no changes to the juice sugar, pH, TA, or polyphenol content, and also that the fermentation completed faster due to this YAN increase. They did not find any residual hydrogen sulfide in the cider. They also conducted an economical analysis and found that this 1% urea treatment was cheaper than a Fermaid-O supplementation directly into the juice. However, this was more expensive than that. Another foliar study found that there is no negative effect on yield or fruit juice composition when applied 6 weeks before harvest. Cook and colleagues found that there was an increase in YAN as well as aromatic compounds in the finished cider. The high treatment led to YAN increase by 130 to 145%. They found that this did reduce the peel color, but this isn't important for cider making. Yeast use amino acids to create the aromatics, as mentioned previously. Asparagine was found to be increased with the organic nitrogen, which is correlated with the volatile compounds. Changes in other amino acids may influence other aroma precursors, and they suggested that more research be conducted on this. Additionally, soil nitrogen applications have been found to increase YAN concentrations as well. Currently, there are no standard recommendations for supplementation for cider making apples with calcium nitrate. However, Carl and colleagues followed the fresh and processing apple recommendation of 2.2 to 2.4% total leaf nitrogen and found that the yan concentrations were increased by 103%. They also found that the fermentation duration decreased by 30% and the rate of fermentation was 110% faster at the maximum time. This application had no effect on pH, TA, or total polyphenols in the juice. They did, however, find that yan increase was greater from foliar applications, such as the ones that I talked about previously, than the calcium nitrate applications in the spring. This shows that orchard nitrogen management can boost juice yan and reduce the need for nutrient supplementation in the juice and improve fermentations without negative effects on the juice or cider quality. I wanted to briefly mention some information on concentrates because I know that some cider makers do use them. No difference in off-flavor formation has been found in concentrates versus pressed juices. Concentrates do, however, contain more yeast-assimilable nitrogen in the form of free amino acids. This could be due to the thermal degradation of volatile compounds during the concentrated process, the partial degradation of proteins during the heat treatment, making amino acids more available, or a shift in proportions during the reconstituting process. Rosend and colleagues found that at a higher fermentation temperature, the juice fermented better than the concentrate, and this is possibly due to some loss of nutrients in the concentrate. Concentrated juices were also found to contain more malic acid, but the consumption rate of malic acid by the yeast is also higher, and this is likely due to the juice containing more of the enzyme that's needed to convert malic acid. They also found that concentrates will increase the formation of long-chain and fatty acid esters, which at lower levels can increase complexity, but this does overall increase the risk of off-flavor formation. So putting this all together, what can you take away from this? Foliar and orchard nitrogen applications can help to increase the yan in your juice, minimizing the need for supplementation. Heavy crop loads can lead to lower yeast assimilable nitrogen in your juice, so be sure to manage your crop load. Always measure yan before fermentation to know what you're working with. Adjust the nutrients that you're using based on the specific yeast needs and not just one size fits all approach. Be sure to feed early and monitor regularly to avoid stuck and sluggish ferments. And choose the cultivar of apples, yeast, and supplementation based on the desired cider style that you're going for. High tannin cultivar apples have been found to impact the amount of yan that's needed for a healthy fermentation, so they may require a little bit of extra supplementation as well. Okay, and I know that's a lot of references, so please reach out to me if you'd like me to send you some of them. And I just really quickly wanted to mention that the Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute is hosting a couple of events over the next few weeks. So be sure to reach out if you'd like any information on these, but we are hosting a post-harvest gathering at Wide River Winery next week. Aaron Norton will be presenting recent data on acidity profiling, and Randall Voss and Dorothy O'Brien will help take the group on a vineyard tour. And we are also hosting our roundtable events this year. Aims, we have 3 throughout the year. And this is always a really great opportunity to connect with fellow winemakers in the state. And new this year, we are taking the roundtable events on the road, and we will be having 2 in Eastern Iowa this December. So again, please reach out if you would like more information on these.